Good afternoon, guest. This is Dr. Kirk Harris, your hostess with the mostest. Oh no, that's very, very corny. I know. We're just glad to have you. This is Dr. Harris from the Black Dispatch. We wanted to tell you about the show we're going to have today. We got an exciting young woman. Not only is she a young, smart, engaged woman, she is an activist and, equally important, an educator. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. But, you know, in our community, education is a fundamental issue, and how we engage in that process and how we prepare our children to strengthen our communities and to build the kind of future we want to see is critical to what we do. And this show is essentially about that topic. And, of course, I got my co-host, my main man, Hubert Morgan, front and center to share and to engage with us about the topic. You know, my brother Hubert, he got a lot of juice. He's a long-time planner. He got things to say about the community and what we ought to be doing. I'm just following after his coattails. You know what I'm saying? He throw me a bone here and there every once in a while. So with that said, Hubert, how you doing today, bro?
Doing well. This is Hubert Morgan. The Black Dispatch is here to discuss. Have the pleasure of talking with Ashley McCall. Ashley, I've had the pleasure of knowing Ashley for a number of years now. And I have seen her just grow into not only an educator, someone who kind of follows in the coattails of so many people in my family who are also educators, but an educator with a mission, an educator who is an activist. She educates in the communities that struggle the most, but have so much potential. Ashley, please introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Again, my name is Ashley McCall. I am a third grade bilingual educator at Chavez Multicultural Academic Center, which is located in the very vibrant neighborhood of Back of the Yards. I've been at Chavez for 5 or 6 years now and have also had the privilege to teach in South Shore, taught Northwest, and I love the phrasing of an educator with a mission. I think that we have such a responsibility and an opportunity as educators, and I take that responsibility and opportunity very seriously. I do my best to leverage the position that I'm in to serve students and families and to, collectively identify what that mission is and do everything within my power to accomplish it. So again, thank you for having me.
Well, Ashley, one of the things that I got to point out, you won an award. What do they call this? The Golden Apple Award? Is that what they call it?
Yes.
Now, usually people don't win that until they're more senior in their careers. How we got to find out what your secret sauce is and what you got going on over there. So let's talk about the fundamentals of your teaching approach and how you won that damn award like at such an early age. And I know you come from a long line of educators yourself, at least as I understand it. So you may have had a head start than most people. But can you tell us, what's your juice? Like, how do you make it happen?
Yes, well, I definitely give honor and thanks to God and credit to the Head Start. I definitely come from a background of educators, and also it's my team. Not only did I have a head start, but I also had an amazing, relay team. So my mother's mother is an educator in community college. My mother was a teacher for 10 years, an administrator for 20 years, is in human resources. So I grew up in a school building, okay? I was collating papers and labeling files and giving tours, and always knew that education was something that I was really interested in, especially as I became more interested in issues of diversity and community and more fully understanding the lever that education can be in individuals' lives and in the lives of the life of a community, and then further seeing the role that education has played in my life as it relates to access and opportunity, and wanting to support that opening of doors for students and families. As far as the award goes, I will say there are some fabulous young people, young, old, all in between, that have been honored, and there are more that deserve to be honored. There are just so many amazing educators that help communities thrive. But I said it when I found out about the award, and I continue to say it, that it's truly a team effort. One of the things that I love about Chavez in particular is that I work with an amazing team of administrators and amazing staff that really create space for me to be the teacher that I want to be and that students deserve. So when I think about the mindsets that we should have as school-based staff, and the mindsets that we want to develop in our students, of becoming lifelong learners, of being present, growing according to our new knowledge and experience, and just the belief in our own possibility and the possibility of students, and really lifting that ceiling of what's possible for students and families. All of that is possible at Chavez, and I want it to be possible everywhere, right? I don't want it to matter what zip code you're born in, or how much property taxes is being paid. Every student deserves that opportunity. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I have very high expectations. I'm smiley right now. I got my bright colors on like I wear in the classroom, but any of my students and their families will tell you, this call don't play. Okay, I expect the most of my students, and it's because I know they're capable of it. So it's not just having high expectations, it's creating the environment that allows students to achieve those expectations. So with that belief, right, has to come the actual work to make sure that that's possible. And I expect things of myself, and if I don't have those high expectations for myself, it's not fair, of course, for me to have them for my students. So that's some of the sauce, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a hell of a lot of sauce.
So Ashley, the viewers and the listeners might ask a question: why are a couple urban planners wanting to talk to an educator, right? But for us, especially Kirk and I, it's how important all of these systems are to strengthening communities, right? And one of the most important systems is access to education. So my question would be, how do you see the community playing a role in kind of the educational framework that you're in, and what are the outcomes that you think that teachers should play in the classroom as it relates to that?
Yeah, I mean, the opportunity is or should be endless. I say should be because the reality is there have historically been a lot of barriers to not just access to great education, but barriers for families to engage with the school community. And the onus is on districts and individual schools to make sure the door is open, and that we truly see education as a partnership. And we also have to, I think, rethink what healthy partnership looks like. I think most people will say, of course, we can't teach without the support of families, but also have a very sort of paternalistic way of thinking about our relationship with families. And there, you know that, you can sense that, and that's not a healthy relationship. It's not going to be a productive relationship. So we have to own that and really do the work to untangle that before we can have a true, healthy, productive partnership for students. Caregivers, of course, when there are school-based events, that's a great opportunity to get into the building, get into your student's classroom, your child's classroom, get to know the teachers and the staff that your child is spending so much time with. There is no way to have, I think, a transformational, education experience for students without also leveraging and highlighting and celebrating the gifts of caregivers, right? So what opportunities are we creating for you all to come share your language, share your history, share your skill sets, because that's all a part of the learning experience as well. And of course, there's local school councils as a more formal way of sharing those gifts. From a community perspective, and I think this is so interesting because there's a common tension between community members with and without children, and thinking about the stakes that they have or don't have in the success of schools. And the reality is that schools are an integral part of our community, regardless of whether or not you have children who are school aged at this exact moment. We should know the schools in our neighborhood. We should be invested in their success, because the outcomes of those schools have connection to future outcomes. When we think about the safety of our communities, there's so much concern about violence. Like, all of that is connected to the goings on in a school building. And we have to care about children even when they're not our own. And I think that is, something probably more familiar and common in my grandmother's generation than now, but we absolutely need to bring that back. And the last thing I'll say from the educator side is we do a lot, and it's needed, right? We're not just teaching content. We're mentors, we're role models, we're confidants, we're healthcare allies, we're translators, we're, financial supports for families. And that, to answer Mr. Morgan's question about the roles that teachers are playing, those are the few that I could come up with quickly. So it is, that phrase, it takes a village, that's not just a cute, pithy something that you put on a wall. It is truly the only way to raise a child, because when we invest in children, we're investing in our community and in ourselves.
And if I can just follow up, Kirk, one of the important things that you just mentioned is the institution in the community. I remember just doing work when they were doing all the school closings. And families were begging, don't close the last institution in our neighborhoods, because that's the center of what we call a stronger neighborhood. Both Kirk and I have had roles in forming schools. And Kirk, we should, at a later point in the show, just talk about the role that we played from a planning perspective. But you were going to ask her a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, Ashley, you're a young black woman who's teaching in a multicultural context. How does that work? I mean, and you're bilingual. How does that work? How are you able to kind of simultaneously embrace those multicultural elements and bring to bear the educational outcomes that you're seeking to promote? So seems like, and then I have another question, which is about the multiple roles that you articulated.
Yeah.
That is to say, it seems like teaching is enough. I mean, that's a lot in and of itself.
For sure.
I mean, how do you navigate that, and what does it take out of you? I'm just wondering.
Yeah. Well, to answer your first question about, I guess, what it means, what it looks like for me as a black woman to teach in my particular context. So for those who aren't familiar, Back of the Yards is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood. The majority of my students are Mexican American. We also have, students who have immigrated from other countries. Several students are also bilingual, maybe speak Spanish at home, speak English predominantly at school, may only speak English, maybe families only speak Spanish. But language is just one part of our identity, right? Our place of birth is one part of our identity. And while it is a big slice of the pie, in the same way that no one can look at me and, I shouldn't say can, they shouldn't look at me and make a decision about who I am as a whole person based on the fact that I appear to be a black woman. I also can't make decisions about who my students are based on their first language, based on their country of birth, because there's so much more to them. And I use that word, vibrant, to describe Back of the Yards, and it's so accurate. It's a neighborhood of artists and business owners and lawyers and organizers, and that's who my students are. So I bring my full self to the space every single day. I'm very bold and proud of my identity. And again, that my being black, my being a woman is just one part of that. But I hope to model that that confidence and that wholeness so that my students and their families know that it's okay to show up as their full selves, and that it's worth celebrating, and that there's a power in knowing who you are and being able to share that with others. So it's not, that doesn't mean it's always easy, but that also doesn't mean that it's a deficit, right? Just because I don't share certain aspects of identity with my students doesn't mean there's not a learning opportunity there, or that it gets in the way of us building community. It just means that the way we build community might look a little bit different. But ultimately, again, I see it as an asset more than anything else. For your second question, what does it take out of you? I said this very recently in another conversation with some folks, which is that, I'm a recovering perfectionist and recovering habitual overcommitter. And Mr. Morgan can probably think of some time. He's like seen me in action just at all hours, stuffing folders and organizing things. And it is a lot. And being a teacher, again, teaching content is a lot of work in and of itself. To become an expert on your content, to continue to develop your pedagogy such that you are becoming more and more student-centered and thinking about how to deliver the content and how to make sure that the content reflects and challenges students. That is a lot. But it's also not enough. And both of those things can be equally true at the same time. So I am a proud member of Trinity United Church of Christ. That just love that community of people, and I'm so grateful for the way that they have poured into me since I've been here. And the reason I bring that up is because a phrase that I love that comes out of that space is, it's not equal giving, it's equal sacrifice. And so that means that what we sacrifice and the way that sacrifice looks is going to be different for every single person every day, depending on their context. And so even what my service looks like now in August of 2021 is not what it looked like 10 years ago. It's not what it looked like 2 weeks ago. And so we have to really be constantly self-aware. What are my gifts? Where are the opportunities for impact? And where can I leverage my gifts? How can I leverage my gifts to be of service to those around me, to those in my community? And that word balance can be so frustrating, because on the one hand, we might ask someone to give, but then also, don't forget to rest, eat a vegetable, drink some water. And the reality is we're not, we say those things really to make ourselves feel better. We're like, I told her to rest, but we're not structurally making it possible or incentivizing people to take care of themselves, and that extends beyond the community. And so I've definitely had to learn what balance means for me and what it looks like for me to do the kind of advocacy that I am interested in, and collaboration that I'm interested in, while also taking care of myself, because of course you can't pour out of an empty vessel.
Right. So that's a lot. So let me ask this question. This is a follow-up, and it looks like, Hubert, you're poised for a question as well. Let me ask, what is it that you find when you come to the classroom every day that you have to navigate? I mean, you talk about what you feel you should be doing as an educator, but there's things that you come to your classroom every day that may challenge the way in which you have the opportunity to deliver your pedagogy, as you say, right? So can you talk a little bit about how the community and the community challenges creep into your classroom experience, and the meanings and the implications of that for the educational outcomes you're hoping to achieve?
Absolutely. And I want to pull something out of that question, right? How community realities creep into the classroom. There's even something really in that phrasing that says something about the way we think about realities in versus outside of the classroom, right? There's this idea that we just need to get through that stuff from the outside so we can focus on what we're here to do. Which begs the question, what are we here to do? Exactly.
Right.
If I am just trying to rush past the fact that you, an 8-year-old, got up this morning, woke up your siblings, made sure they had something to eat, make sure that everyone was dressed, got everyone to school, didn't have time to do your homework because you were, taking care of your children. Your siblings as if they were your children. If I'm just trying to quickly hustle past that, like, what am I doing?
Right.
And you can't, like, our pedagogy has to center students as people. Something else that came out of, I wish I could remember when Pastor Moss out of Trinity mentioned this, but just children being just the most vulnerable population. It is so rare to be in spaces where we think and talk about children as people with needs and wants and feelings and desires that deserve to be attended to. That's the latter part. We might say they feel, they want, they need, but does it matter? They're just a child. And when you say that, when you internalize that, it's going to guide the decisions that you make about how you interact with children. So let's say you bring that into the classroom. Your job is to be a student. Your job is to, be your best self. Well, what happens when, so-and-so comes in, he's taken the bus to school with, his brother, has been up for hours, and he's exhausted. Do I say, but it's time to work, or do I let him take a nap on the beanbag and we figure out, what to do from there? When I have the sibling who's taking care of all of her younger siblings, do I give her space to reflect about her morning and center herself? Or do I pressure her to get started on an assignment that we all started 15, 20 minutes ago? And something else that's really interesting about, again, the attempt to separate what's happening in and outside of school buildings is the way we do or don't do that for adults. We love to talk about the real world versus what's happening in the classroom, or what you're experiencing at an elementary, K-8 space versus when you grow up. If we were to start this conversation and just a minute before you found out about some really heartbreaking news, would my reaction to you be, you said we was going to start this conversation at 2:30, so let's get moving because that's what we said we were going to do? That's inhumane. And it's not what we should be modeling for students. It's not how we should be treating children. And that is a part of education. That is a social awareness. That is an empathy. Like, those are, and for folks that want to bring it back to standards, we need students to be achieving. Of course we do. But they're not going to be in a place to do that if they don't have the mental and emotional capacity to do so. Also, all of that content is driven by social and emotional learning standards, which can be looked up, and I am happy to share with you because it's not separate, it's both and.
You a bad girl. That's all I got to say. You a bad girl. That's all I got to say. Man, I wish I had that much damn sense when I was your age. I would have been somebody.
Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
You're muted, Hubert.
Yeah, we've had conversations about, the whole Montessori school thing, right? So for those who are listening and watching, my sons went to a Montessori school. And actually, I just heard you talk about something that I would imagine that the structure of how you are in the public school system, it's probably a challenge for you to be able to be cognizant of things that's going on in the child's life outside of the classroom and make accommodations for it in the child's classroom, in your classroom, and at the same time drive for the things that are measured, right? Test scores and things like that. This isn't for a long answer, but that must be a huge challenge.
It is, and this is when I said that, I'm very fortunate to work at a school that understands the both and creates space for me to teach in a way that responds to both of those, like both sides of the coin. And it's important to know that they're the same coin. Like it's, people want to separate them, they're the same. And also, data shows that you can do both. Students perform better academically when their needs are met. So it's, those two things really aren't at war with each other. Now, they're not at war with each other naturally, whether or not they are in a system, right, in a district that may or may not encourage that is an entire conversation, a separate conversation.
Right.
Ashley, I'm going to ask you if you could just geographically place the back of the yards for the listeners who might not be familiar with the neighborhoods that we have.
Sure. I feel like this is a geography pop quiz. So, my school is at 47th and Ashland is the major intersection. If you're in Chicago, it's kind of the next neighborhood west of Bronzeville. It's a little south of Bridgeport and Pilsen. So it's a good little spot.
Yeah, that's good. So let me ask this, because there's so many things we could potentially ask you, what always strikes me about, because we've spoken with you before, what always strikes me is the level at which you can articulate and nuance the issues. And so let me ask you this question, and it's not one that we actually prepped for. It just kind of came to me, and that is this. So there are politics in education, right? And in Chicago, the politics are replete. And I'm wondering, given your role in the classroom, and given what you know about the politics, and given what you know about the systems that are functioning, not always in a supportive way for you or your students, what keeps you in the system? Like, what drives you to remain where you are and do your best work, as opposed to get frustrated and say to hell with it?
My dad would love this question. And I will also give him a shout out for the nuance. I feel like just been trained up to see nuance under his tutelage. And I joke that he would love this question because as a kid, I would always say how much I hated politics. Just capital P politics. It's like, it's obnoxious, it's loud, it's disgusting, it's distracting. And it'd be so frustrating. And he would always say, oh, but you'd be such a great politician, right? And of course, he was thoroughly amused when I sort of accidentally majored in political science in undergrad. And that just sort of came from taking courses I happened to be interested in. And he's like, I told you. And I say that to say, I was very resistant to just the political nature of life, of education. And it was and continues to be a source of frustration for me. But what changed is just really trying to go more to like asset-based thinking, right? I can't change the political nature of education. What can I change? Where's the leverage point? Where's the entry point that's going to allow me to have the impact I want to have? And once I accepted the political nature of education, regardless of my personal feelings about it, it allowed me to seek out and I more easily identify opportunities for impact. Teachers are natural organizers. We are surrounded by networks of people, colleagues, administrators, students, families. We organize, it's what we do. Teachers are natural policymakers. Oftentimes, and I was really interested in education policy prior to my starting my career as an educator, but what stopped me from going directly into policy is the fact that so many politicians who have so much to say about education are doing so with very little experience in the classroom. Either you were in the classroom for a couple of years, 10 to 15 years ago, or you've never been there. Education is one of the few professions where we will just really let anybody have an opinion because we've all gone through it. Right? Everyone at some point has been a student. And so we lean on that experience, no matter how many decades old it is, as a driver for our opinions about current policy. Or we have children who are in schools, and so we use that experience to drive our policy or to drive our opinions about policy. And that's just not enough, right? There's no way that I would say, well, I went to the doctor's office last month, and so I have very strong opinions about this healthcare structure and no, I need to do a little bit more. I need to do a little bit more research than that. Or like, well, I have a car, so I know all about, okay, the automobile industry, because I have been in a car, I see cars driving up and down the street, and I have strong opinions, right? It's comical, right, when we think about it in other spaces. And so I don't say that to discount the personal experiences that people have had. This really goes back to community and I think back to the school closings and really how traumatic education experiences can be and school closings can be, and how that informs your opinion about what's going on in your school and your child's school and so on. But again, it has to be both and. Your particular experience can be valid, but you have to still be open to hearing and knowing what's going on in schools right now from folks who are in the building right now. And we've got to be able to have conversation, from in a space of, geared toward productivity and understanding. So I guess what keeps me here is knowing that I have the opportunity to make an impact. And when I think about, because education doesn't have a sort of traditional career ladder, it's always, do you want to be a principal? Do you want to do this? When are you going to leave the classroom? But what I know is I have a very unique opportunity to impact policy because I am still in the classroom, right? Because I'm still, what's the phrase, boots on the ground. Like I'm with students every single day. I'm organizing with teachers every single day. And so that is a particular experience and a particular lens that you just don't see as frequently.
That's great. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, let me just lift up this because, Kirk, as planners, as urban planners, we see the Black community not through the lens of, a deficit, but Ashley mentioned just asset-based. So one of the principles that we bring to this show is the fact that we will talk about our community first and foremost from an asset-based perspective. Ashley, let me ask a question, because so much of the thinking around this show that Kirk and I have thought about over this last year, through the year 2020, coming out of 2020, it has definitely put a strain on, the system and how you do things remotely and things like this. Let me then ask, you are now opening back up, and you now know what you can do virtually. How are some of these things that you are going to be balancing going forward?
In terms of continuing to do kind of advocacy work and what is that going to look like? I don't have a simple answer for this one, because I think the virtual component just becomes another component to consider. But in terms of my personal balance, nothing has changed, right? I think can be easy to say, oh, we could just do all these meetings virtually, and I can squeeze a little bit more into the calendar. But I have to think about holistically whether or not that is going to allow me to have the impact that I want to have. If I'm, again, starting to just chip away at those hours in my calendar, that's not going to allow me to be my best teacher or my best, advocate. So I definitely think we've learned a lot of lessons during this remote time of what can be done virtually. A really simple example is, we did family conferences this year, all virtual. Loved it. Hope it never goes away. They were so accessible for students and families. Attendance rates were higher. It was just wonderful. And that is something that we need to keep. From an organizing space, we saw a lot of folks activate Slack and all these other apps that I don't fully understand, but that I've had to figure out to continue to organize. And it means that it is a little bit easier to stay in communication with people, to get updates, to respond. That can be a little dangerous, though, because again, when people have constant access to you, that can be draining. So personally, it's not going to change much because I'm really trying to keep a better pulse on what I have the capacity to do. But I do hope from a community perspective that we continue to be mindful of the ways that we can stay connected, even if we're not physically in the same space.
Yeah. So, Ashley, you've been really generous with your time. I have one other question, and I don't know if Hubert has one last question as we move along in this interview. But given your experience to date and the reflections of your classroom, reflecting on your classroom experiences, your understanding about the way the educational system works, at least here in Chicago and in your school, what are the things that you would like to change? Because we're very much interested in lifting up, opportunities for points of entry, and you talked about points of entry for building solutions. What are some of the strategic things that you would like to see change based on your experience to date?
Whew. I don't know if we have enough time for that one. Okay.
Plus, I have another question.
No problem. I'll be as efficient as possible. So, what would I like to see change? I don't hate to start with mindsets, but I recognize that sometimes starting with mindsets can feel a little frustrating for people because they want to get to what's the policy, what's the action, right, what's something that's going to change. Sorry, what's going on here? Oh, there we go. And something that I've talked about with colleagues, even on our PLC, professional learning committees on staff, is that a lot of times before policy changes can happen, or in order for policy changes to be successful, there's a mindset shift that has to happen, right? Your values need to shift so that you buy into that policy, so that you support that policy. So so I'll focus on the elementary band where I am, for example. A lot of times we don't see the K-5 band as, like, they're just kids, right? We don't really value the knowledge and experience of young people. And I'm sure, honestly, middle school and the high school teachers would even say the same, just at a different level. We have to start valuing the knowledge and experience of young people. We have to listen to them, we have to believe them, and we have to use what we learn to inform our policies, our local classroom level policies, our district policies, and so on. From a broader education policy space, a lot of times policy is just sort of this broad brush. All students from kindergartners to 12th graders will do X, Y, and Z. But folks who are in education know that there is so much nuance and distinction that happens between grade level bands. So, your K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12. And we have to be thinking about how our both hyper-local and, broader policies are drafted to address the needs of different age children, because they don't need the same thing, right? 20-year-olds don't necessarily need the same thing as 30-year-olds who don't need the same thing as 70-year-olds. So why are we trying to, paint that K to 12 education experience with the same broad brush? Another, change. I'll give another hyper-local example, and this is something that an opportunity for caregivers to impact. In the same way that teachers need to continue to check ourselves in terms of how we are building relationships with caregivers, I think that work, it needs to be reciprocal, right? Thinking about what are your biases about teachers, about schools, where do they come from? How are those biases and experiences impacting my approach to this teacher, all teachers, how can you make sure that you're doing the best you can to arrive into a conversation like as present as possible with the realities of whatever the issue is, without all of those biases. And again, this is on educators as well, like impacting that conversation, because trust building is key. And if we're not building trust and trusting one another to attempt to solve whatever problem is in front of us, it's going to be really, really hard to be shared advocates for the children that we're trying to support. So it means moving from complaining about something you keep seeing to offering solutions, from, going over folks' heads to having a difficult conversation with, whatever staff member is in question. Because ultimately we want to get to a space where we're organizing and advocating together, because that's where our power is.
Okay, thank you. That's very, very helpful. So, Hugh, you got a last question you want to wrap with?
So, again, I keep bringing up the whole urban planner thing. As we think about systems and everything that needs to come together in a community for the community to function well, and for people who live in the community to function within that community. So from the perspective of, the kids that come to your classroom and the challenges that they face when they get up in the mornings, things like access to housing and access to transportation, safety and security in the community, the type of jobs that their parents or grandparents might have. What are some of those things, and how do some of those things play out as you, the person who is probably with these kids as much as, if not more than, the parents themselves?
I think that goes back to, the earlier conversation about recognizing that we can't separate those things. And that by trying to, we're really asking students to sort of leave a part of their identity at the door, right? Doesn't matter what happened last night. Right now it's school time. Doesn't matter what happened this morning, or you can't do that, because the jobs that students' families have impact how they show up in your classroom. We saw a perfect example of that during remote and hybrid learning, right? How caregivers' schedules were impacting their ability to support students during online learning, to come to the school to pick up materials, to come to pick up meals from the building. And this is a uniquely urban issue. It's not a uniquely urban reality, though it might be a uniquely urban issue, right? Because the reality is that the jobs of caregivers, healthcare access, all of those things exist no matter where you are.
That's right.
But it becomes invisible when you have, and always have had, easy access. When you have space to set up virtual learning spaces for 4 different children under the same roof. When it's just you and your immediate family, and you're not caring for grandparents and aunts and cousins. When you don't have to go to the school to pick up meals because you have someone to help you cook meals, or you have the time and the resources to cook meals for all of those children. And we can't treat these different realities as an opportunity to judge or assign worth to students and families as we've done historically.
Yeah. Right,
cannot, it would be irresponsible for me to ignore those realities. It would be just as irresponsible to attend to them, but decide that I know what that means, right? Because of what's happening, because of how you're showing up, X must be true about you, Y must be true about your family. And that's just not the case. There are too many structural influences. And also, who the heck am I, right? To tell anyone about their own realities and identity. That's not my job. My job is to make space, to see you, to let you know that however you show up, we appreciate you, we respect you, we love you. This is a place where you can learn, where you can ask questions, where you can challenge and be challenged. And some days it's going to be bumpy. Some days it might be a hot mess, but you'll come back tomorrow and we'll try it again. That's life, right? That's life.
Right. That's exactly right. So is there anything that you feel like we missed and touching base with you today, and you've been just so fabulous in sharing. Like I say, I just can't believe how effective you are as a teacher based on what you're talking about. But what I find is just so fascinating is how young you are and how capable you are in doing what you do. It's just amazing. But is there anything that you think we've missed in the discussion today that you feel like we ought to at least touch on, albeit quickly?
Yeah. Mr. Morgan, did you have a question before I try and think of something?
I would just like the viewers and listeners to know that we have a series of interviews with people who we feel are key to understanding what these kind of pillars are. Education today is the one that we're talking to Ashley about. We will get into education so much deeper, and of course we will have you back, Ashley, but just know that you are one of the foremost people who we're interviewing to touch on this subject.
Well, I appreciate that, and I also, again, take that as a responsibility, not just to be informed myself, but to make sure that the way I define being informed, right, is being informed by others, right? What I have to say is hopefully a reflection of everything that I'm learning from community members, from colleagues, from students, and so on. Is there anything I think we've missed? I would actually just say as we're getting ready to return to the classroom, as Mr. Morgan said, and so many folks are anticipating, some hoping for a quote-unquote regular school year. And I did some writing about this time a year ago, really pushing back on the idea of a regular school year and using this as an opportunity to just radically reimagine what is possible for schools. And I continue to want that. I don't want a regular school year. Do I want some semblance of consistency for students and families and educators? Absolutely. But I want everyone to be safe. And it goes back to that holistic piece. I can't be in sole pursuit of, academic content that I'm not willing to grapple with the realities of where we are, which is heading into our third year, affected by a global pandemic, and the many ways that has manifested in kids' lives. I'm still not seeing enough talking about, enough conversation about trauma response, about the grief that our students have. Students lost family members. Why aren't we talking about this? Parents were, traveling to say goodbye to their parents, and educators, people that I know, lost relatives. So I guess I'll leave with this. We keep wanting to talk about, learning loss. Oh, I never want to hear that again. Because we're asking people to recover in the middle of survival.
Right, exactly.
That
makes sense.
We are not in recovery yet. Yeah. And that's, we were recovering from stuff before the global pandemic hit. There are so many just unresolved sort of crises within our public school system. But we're asking students and families to thrive when we have still not given them the resources to survive. And we deserve better.
Ooh-wee.
So Ashley, I know that there's some activism and advocacy that you do. If people were interested in being able to follow you, can we give them a link to some of the work that you do?
Sure. Probably the easiest way to get connected, again, even though I'm secretly, y'all, 88 years old and I do not know how to work any of these platforms, I am on Twitter. So that would be really easy. Miss McCall, or at ASHLM_12. You can also follow my Substack, which is Miss McCall's Musings. which should be pretty easy to find. But if you connect with me on Twitter, I can connect you to everything else because I'm still trying to figure out how to effectively do the social media thing.
Well,
We'll get all of that from you and provide it to folks.
Awesome.
well, Ashley, you are awesome, an unbelievable educator, advocate, community builder. We thank you for the contributions that you make. You make us smile, and you know that because we know if we got people like you out there doing the work, the world is not going to be as messed up as us old people left it. You know, so thank you so very much for all that you do every single day.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy our conversations.
All right.
It was our pleasure.
It was absolutely a pleasure. And catch us, folks, in our next episode from the Black Dispatch. We got more to come. It's going to be out of sight, out of mind. And we're going to have, I don't know if we can get anybody as good as Ashley. No, she's exceptional. She's exceptional. I don't know if we can get anybody as good as Ashley, but we're going to try. All right. Well, thank you
or
for
we
that.
might just have Ashley come and host something.
Oh yeah,
Hey.
she needs to come. Yeah, we should. That would be a trifecta. The old people and the young person, right? That would be unbelievable. Well, y'all take good care, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.